The things that I think go really well in the military environment is there's a definite organizational structure. You've been in organizations like I have that you walk in and it's like, who reports to who, and nobody knows who they report to. And so actually, one of the things we found in this last year as we've talked with organizations is roles and responsibilities is an area that people just are so unfamiliar with. It's like, well, I report to this person for this, but I report to this person for this. And there's this multi-matrix type of organizational structure, which is not necessarily a bad idea. It's just that there's not a delineation of who's responsible for different things.
Folks, I'm really excited about our show today. Today, we're going to talk about something that may sound very obvious on the surface, but what you're going to hear from our guest on the show is there's so many subtleties to it. We're going to talk about leadership development. Specifically, how do we become leaders when we get into that first leadership role? First-time managers, supervisors, or maybe we've gotten promoted a level or two beyond what we're used to. What are some of the big things we can be doing, and what are some of the traps that we need to avoid? So my guest today is Mark Noon, and Mark is a really interesting guy because not only was he in the Air Force for 20 years, he spent a lot of time also in healthcare as a leadership transformation expert. And Mark today he's a principal, he's a speaker, author, coach at Leadership 10. He works with all different kinds of organizations kind of around the nation, around the world, around these ideas of leadership. So I love hearing from Mark, not only his background and what he's learned, both his time in the Air Force and in healthcare, but also some of the tips he gives us. So listen really close to those. I made a whole list of 2 pages of notes. So at the end of the show, I'll share all my notes, but take some notes yourself. Mark's got so much to share. I just know you're going to love the show.
Welding together practical insights and powerful conversations to forge world-class leaders. This is the Leadership Foundry Podcast. Now, here's this week's host, Brandon Smith, co-founder of the Leadership Foundry.
Mark, I'm really excited to have you on the show today. Really excited about your perspective. So given your long both history in both Air Force and other kind of worlds, I've been really enjoying not only listening to some of your prior shows you've been on, but I would really love to get your perspective on our topic today around leadership development. So before we start kind of jumping into kind of your, what you've learned in your career around that, for our listeners, maybe you could share a little bit about your background. What ultimately kind of got you doing what you're doing today?
Yeah, great. Thanks, Brandon. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. For me, leadership has always been a forefront of what I've done probably for 25 years. I joined the United States Air Force in 1992 and, was just joined. I have no education, no real background in anything. Just decided I needed a job really and joined the Air Force. And through that, learned a lot of things, finished my degree, had an opportunity to be promoted from enlisted ranks to the officer ranks. And at that time, was not necessarily prepared to be a leader. And what happens in the military is all of a sudden you finish your 4-year degree and you're qualified, so to speak, to be an officer. So I get this opportunity to be an officer, which was a great thing to have happen for me and my family. But I walked into that job not really being prepared as a leader. It's like I'm a really good lab tech. I was in the clinical lab at that time. And now I'm a lab director. And what's my training to be a lab director? Literally, it was like a weekend. I got promoted on Friday and Monday, I'm showing up at my new job. But I spent the next 12 years really developing the leadership skills that I think I really needed. And people did help me along the way. And I was thankful for that. It propelled me into this idea that why are people not ready to move into a leadership role? Brandon, you're really good at your job one day and your boss comes to you and says, hey, how would you like to manage this department? And you say, hey, great. I'm thinking I'm going to get a raise. I'm going to get a better pay. And that does happen. But you walk in and you go, what do I do now? And I'm not prepared for that. So I've really spent the last now 20 years focused on developing people in that. So when I retired from the Air Force, I went to work for a company in Pensacola, Florida, which is down the road from where I live here in Destin, Florida. And for about 8 years was coaching executives and doing leader development in the healthcare arena. And then a year ago, I had the opportunity to venture out on my own and form my own company now called Leadership 10. I have a couple partners in that, and we do leader development around the country as well. So it's really been a fun journey.
Yeah, that's and I love that journey, and I can't wait to kind of hear more about it today. But what you said is so common for so many people. They get promoted, and it's like, okay, now go lead people. And wow, what does that mean to lead people?
Yeah.
And it's interesting, I was doing a work with a group of frontline supervisors recently. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times what they end up defaulting back on is, well, I played sports in high school, so I'll just lead them like my football coach led me.
Right.
Which isn't necessarily always going to be effective, right? Yeah. So you have to kind of figure that out a little bit. So, maybe a good starting place for us, Mark. What are some of those kind of main elements that you found really critical to helping people grow and develop as leaders? What are some of those things they've got to kind of focus on or work on?
Yeah, there's 4 of them, actually. It's interesting you say that because I've polled a lot of audience. I've spoken in probably 300 organizations around the country over the last 15 years or so. And I poll them many times. I say, what are the things you struggled with when you first became a leader? And it's typically down to 4 things. Those 4 things are communication. That's on everybody's list for everything, right? Motivation, delegation, and culture. So think about this in how do we communicate with people? To what level do we communicate with people? Next to that is motivation. Do we know how to motivate people, or what motivates people? How do they like to be recognized? What inspires them? The third one, delegation. Oh my gosh, every new leader comes in thinking that they have to do everything because that's what a good leader does. We have to be there 24/7 for our team or whatever. And it sounds great in theory until you start trying to do that, and then you get burnt out. And I say this with delegation, that new leaders, particularly, they're hoarders. They hoard all of this responsibility because they think they're supposed to, rather than give it up to people and develop other people. And the fourth one is this idea of culture. And that's probably one of my favorite ones is, how do we develop the right environment for people to be successful? How do I develop other leaders? You've probably read 100 leadership books like I have that say, the true measure of a leader is, do they develop other leaders? And that's been really that focus. So those 4 things are probably, and I go into detail all day on those, but those are the 4 things that I really try to spend a lot of time on.
Yeah. So, I want to go into those a little bit more detail. So we've got our 4. We've got communication, motivation, delegation, and culture.
Yeah.
Okay. So which one do you find to be the hardest? What's the hardest that you find with folks?
The hardest, now, again, communication, probably only because on every employee engagement survey I've ever read, and I've probably read and gone through 100 of them, it's always communication. But nobody says what that means. It's just, we have more communication we know what to do with, right? But it's the right communication. It's the type of communication. So that's probably the most difficult. But I don't go into that one as much because it's so broad. There's so many aspects to it. So I think delegation is my number one focus when I go in, because I think new leaders, again, like I said, they tend to hoard all this responsibility. And in fact, I just had a conversation with a nurse leader at a hospital just this week. And she said this, she says she feels so responsible for everything all the time that she feels like she has to be there and she has to be available. And anytime somebody says, hey, can you do this? Can you do this? And she says, yes. Rather than just going, hey, here's somebody else who can help you do that, or here's some responsibilities I can give up that enable me to be more available for my team. So Brandon, if you're that person, I say, hey, Brandon, can you take this for me or go to this meeting for me? Then I have that, I just freed up an hour as a leader to be able to go and spend time with my team and developing them versus having to spend all this time at this meeting that probably I don't even need to be at anyway, right? I just need to represent. You ever been in meetings like that where you just go and it's like, we need somebody from your department? Well, I can send anybody from my department. I don't have to send the boss, right? Right. I can now go focus my time on other things. But yeah, delegation is, in fact, I'm in the middle of writing my next book on delegation. So that's I guess why it's been the big theme for me.
That's exciting. When you're going to have that? When's that book going to come out?
Coming out is different than finishing. So finishing, I hope to have it finished in the next couple of months. When it gets published, that's up to whoever I can get to publish it and however long that takes. But it'll probably be done here in the next month or 2.
That's great. So delegation. I think you make such a good point around that because it's, I always think of the analogy of, a cook in the kitchen, right? You're really, really good at cooking these dishes. They now just appointed you to head chef. And you should be kind of quality checking everything coming out of the kitchen. But instead, most folks do is that just mean they think in their mind, well, I guess I just need to be cooking all the dishes. I just cook more. Right. Which is not the role at all. So it's definitely challenging. So
that's a great illustration, because I've actually heard people say that chefs make the worst restaurant owners, right? Because they don't know how to run a restaurant. They know how to cook, and that's where they should be spending their time. Exactly. Great point.
Yeah. And in many ways, they, if they really do their job well as an owner, they shouldn't be cooking. They should be quality checking, watching culture, for example, setting culture in the dining room with customers, but also in the kitchen. Motivating. Yeah. I think we're onto something, Mark. We're onto something.
Yeah. Right.
So speaking of like different environments, I love going into different places, different industries, different work environments, and seeing the unique things that make them great, but also some of the unique challenges that they have. So you've got this interesting background because you've both got time in the Air Force, but you've also had time in kind of healthcare. Right. So I had a mentor of mine share with me years ago this beautiful saying. He says, we all hold a piece of the truth. And I think that's true for even industries. So I would love to get your perspective on, let's start with the Air Force first, or military in general. What do you think is done really, really well from a leadership perspective? And what do you think are some of the unique challenges in that environment, in that world?
Yeah, the things that I think go really well in the military environment is there's a definite organizational structure. You've been in organizations like I have that you walk in and it's like, who reports to who, and nobody knows who they report to. And so actually, one of the things we found in this last year as we've talked with organizations is roles and responsibilities is an area that people just are so unfamiliar with. It's like, well, I report to this person for this, but I report to this person for this. And there's this multi-matrix type of organizational structure, which is not necessarily a bad idea. It's just that there's not a delineation of who's responsible for different things. And then in the same thing, chain of command. So when I think of, okay, if I'm, at the third down the list of the chain of command, I don't necessarily can't go to the commander or the CEO and just start having a conversation about whatever I'm having a problem with. I need to go to you, Brandon. You're my boss. I need to have a conversation with you. And so I think we do that really well in the military. And I've been able to bring that organizational structure to a lot of corporations and help them understand this. There's a need. People want to know who they're responsible to, and then what the responsibilities are within that. So I think that's gone really, really well. The way we communicate in the military, there's a lot of really good, we call it preparatory commands, meaning that in a marching order, when you're marching as a formation, before you make a left turn as the formation, you literally get a preparatory command. It's almost like, hey, everybody, we're going to turn left on the third step. And then on the third step, everybody turns left. And so it's this, prepare to shift kind of thing, and then shift. And so I brought that communication style to a lot of organizations, that they understand that, you just can't just go, hey, blah, 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 and start communicating something until you get people's attention and kind of give them a prep of what you're going to say. The other side of that is everybody thinks that the military is this, wonderful leadership organization. And we do a free, what we call a leadership cohort here in the Panhandle of Florida that we offer to anywhere from 6 to 12 young professionals. We do it for free. My partners and I, we've done this now. This is our third year. And we just take these folks in for 4 or 5 months at a time and just coach them on leadership. And there's always an Air Force member in there who says this was the best leadership course they've ever been in, even though they've had multiple leadership courses in their time in the military. And I think what's done poorly is that we put a lot of leadership things into place, but we don't give people the practical opportunities and the practical coaching that needs to go along with that development.
Got it. Okay. So I love that. And I think you hit on some really important things. So many in the business world, organizations love matrix. Oh, matrix this, matrix that. Yeah. It seems it looks so good on paper because it looks flexible and nimble, but everyone is scratching their head on who has decision-making rights around this.
Correct.
And who do I go to if I have a problem?
Right.
And it ends up, they go to one person and say, well, no, I'll go back to that person. We'll go back to that person. So I think you make a really good point that chain of command, the clarity around roles and responsibilities, and then of course, giving people the heads up. So you can prevent as much fire drills as possible. Right. So speaking of fire drills, I would love to switch over now to healthcare.
Yeah.
So how about that world? What do you think is done really, really well from a leadership perspective? And what are some of the unique challenges that space has that you've tried to help them wrestle with?
Yeah, what I think healthcare does really, really well is they are very focused on people. Because that's their job, right? So they're not focused on a product, they're focused on people. It's about making people better. And so that focus that is attended toward patients is also attended toward their staff. So I think they do a really good job for the most part in most organizations at taking really good care of people. So I delineate that as patients and staff, but people in general. Whereas it's not, General Motors making cars that are just a byproduct of what the people do. These are people taking care of people. So I think that element brings in such a caring atmosphere, because there's one thing that employees look for in their leader is somebody who's really good at what they do, but they also look for somebody who cares about them as a person. And so when your job is to care about people, you want your boss to care about you as well. And I think they do a really good job of that. The antithesis of that, as you just stated, what do they struggle with? And this goes back to that delegation element. They hoard things because they're so nurturing and they're so caring and they're so focused on taking good care of patients that when they have to take care of their staff, they do the same thing. So they almost cuddle them in some ways, or they coddle them, or they hoard all of this responsibility. They're like, well, I don't want to give Brandon too much work because he's got these patients to take care of, and if I give him this responsibility, he's going to be overwhelmed, and so I'll just do that. And then I do that with Whitney, and I do that with Emily, and all these different people. And next thing you know, I'm spending 16 hours a day doing all these things because I'm so nurturing and caring. And my staff is like, well, great, we got an easy job because, Mark's taking care of everything, but Mark's being burned out in the first 6 months of being a leader. So, yeah. So absolutely it's the strength is your weakness kind of thing, right? Your greatest strength, taking care of people, can also be your toughest element as a leader.
It's interesting here you talk as you were going through that list. It hit me. It's like, oh my gosh, I've done a lot of work in lots of different worlds. That also sounds like the church world. When I think about a lot of like religious institutions, same thing, focus on people, have a tendency to hoard, over nurture, over martyr. And then, the burnout rates in those environments is really, really high. People working in church offices, for example, whether it's pastoral or just doing a lot of the administrative stuff, same kind of thing.
It is. I actually coach a large church right now and their pastoral staff, and it's exactly the same thing, right? They get overwhelmed with this because they think of this sense of responsibility. That's a great illustration.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, okay. Well, Mark, this is great. So, all right. So now I want to go down a little other path since I've got you here. Yeah. So let's say we've got this brand new leader and we have just promoted her. And it's a really exciting thing. Okay. Mm-hmm. But she really has never had this kind of leadership responsibility before. It's bigger than what she's ever had before. Mm-hmm. What are some starting places? What are some things just at a general level that any new leader can do that will start to get her or him better?
Mm-hmm. It's self-leadership. The first thing we teach in any organization we go into, or the first thing we teach in this cohort that I told you about, is about self-leadership. Who are you as a leader? First of all, every employee wants three things out of a leader. I kind of alluded to this before. They want to know who you are. They want to know you're good at what you do, and they want to know you care about them. So this idea of who you are is, and are you good at what you do, is this self-leadership. Am I leading myself well? Am I getting good direction? Am I setting good goals for myself? Am I developing myself as a leader? Am I learning the aspects of leadership that are necessary? Because I can't lead other people if I'm not leading myself well. We've had so many people particularly in our free cohort that we do that have come away and gone, wow, I've never had anybody help me look at myself in the way that we did for them. We talk about values. We talk about core values for yourself. You can't develop core values as a department or an organization until you've developed core values for yourself. And those are things that we walk people through an exercise on listing. Like, we'll give them 100 different core values and have them choose what they think are the most important. And then we have them prioritize which one is higher than another until they get down to their final 5, maybe even 3 or 3 to 5 of their core values, and say, this is who I am. Then I think when they go to talk to their team, they can say, hey, as a leader, this is who I am. Because again, who you are you good at what you do, and do you care? If I don't know who I am, how can I explain who I am to them? If I don't know my core values, how can I show how I lead by those core values?
Yeah, that's great. So it sounds like the starting place really is getting clear on what your values are, getting clear about, what really matters to you so you can communicate that. And then also making sure that you've got some good practices for developing and leading yourself, whether that might be, discipline to take care of yourself, but also just that constant yearning and effort to grow.
I'm coaching a guy right now who's really struggling with this idea of being a leader and being consistent. And what he's come to the conclusion is that the consistency or lack of consistency that he exhibits at the workplace is a reflection of his own character. And so if he's not consistently on time, let's say at work, and people just kind of go, oh, well, that's who he is. Well, then are they also questioning his character, his integrity in other areas and saying, well, that's, I'm not sure I can trust him in that area. So it's kind of that self-reflection as well.
It's interesting. I saw a study done, this was a few years ago, and the researchers asked this question. They said, what's the worst kind of boss to work for? Worst kind of boss. And I thought for sure they were going to say like the angry, yelling and screaming, pound the fist on the table boss. Mm-hmm. That wasn't number one. Micromanager wasn't number one. The ghosting boss wasn't number one. It was what you just said, Mark. It was a highly inconsistent boss.
Yes.
Was number one. That was the worst because you never knew what you were going to get on a given day.
Right.
You couldn't manage around it because you just didn't know what you were going to get. So they put consistency as the number one most important thing. So I think you make a really good point there.
Yeah, it absolutely is.
So we've got self-leadership as step one. Is there a step two?
Step two is, I think, again, like who you are. Are you good at what you do? And again, good at what you do is are you becoming a better leader? So if I walk in day one and, I got Isaac, Whitney, and Emily and Brandon are my people and they're all, I'm going to sit down and say, hey, I'm the brand new leader. This is who I am. And I share my core values. I share how I lead. And then I say, I'm kind of new to this leadership thing. I'm growing. I'm learning. I'm in this position. And I'm honored to be in this position, but I'm still learning to grow. And so grow with me. Help them to understand that I'm not perfect yet. Now, if I'm an experienced leader and I walk in, I say, I've been leading a lot of places. I don't walk in all full of myself saying I know everything and I'm going to lead this department and we're going to be successful. I still come in with that humility, but I'm coming in with and letting people know I am good at what I do. I've done this for a long time, but I don't know you guys and I haven't led you and I need to know who you are and I need to know things about you so that I can lead you more effectively. I need your feedback often to say, hey, here's how I need to be led. Here's how I need to be communicated with. Here's how I'm motivated. Here's how I like to be recognized. Finding out those kind of things, I think, is so very important so that we just don't assume. I can't assume that Isaac likes to be recognized the same way Brandon does, right? Because if I go recognize it, he may go, well, thanks, but that's really not my style. I don't really want to be up in front of everybody getting a big award. I just kind of want to pat on the back and say, hey, good job, right?
You've met Isaac before. I didn't think you met him before.
Right. I must have.
So I love that. As I wrote down a couple of things. I wrote down humility and vulnerability and even transparency. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And then I also wrote down this phrase that came to mind for me, user manual. It's like, I'm going to give everybody my user manual, but I also want to learn everybody else's user manual.
Yeah.
So, kind of how they tick and what do they need and how they operate. Like, don't put Isaac on a big stage and give him a big award. He'd rather not have that.
Right.
There's
now,
other
he
ways
deserves the award, right? He wants the recognition. Internally, he wants it. He just doesn't want to be, ticker tape parade down Fifth Avenue kind of thing. Whereas, Brandon, you and I may like that. We don't mind being in front of an audience and having all that attention and whatever. Not that we don't mind a pat on the back, but understanding that is such a key, crucial element of leadership so that, I'm doing the right thing for Isaac, but I'm not doing it in the right way. And I may even embarrass him in doing that or make him feel, my wife is very much the same way. If she had to be on a stage like I am, that would be, a horrible thing for her to have happen. But at the same time, she wants to be recognized. Right?
That's not my wife. My wife is perfectly fine with the stage. She's looking, she's smirking. She's like, yes, kind of, maybe. She does. She likes it. She does. So, okay. All right. So Mark, we got some good, first steps, step one, step two, what we can do. Yeah. I've got a couple more questions for you. So now let's go to the other side of the coin.
Okay.
What are leadership derailers that you see? What are the big no-nos that you say, you see leaders, make those missteps and you say, gosh, yeah, boy, we need to try and avoid those.
Well, I think we talked about one particularly already is hoarding, thinking that you have to do everything, thinking that you have to be available all the time. Having worked with healthcare organizations for such a long time, you have 24-hour shifts. So I literally, no kidding, just this morning had a conversation with a healthcare leader I was coaching. We were doing by Zoom, and he said, I'm getting these calls at 3:00 in the morning. I said, well, that can't happen. I mean, life and death, I get it, but these are just simple questions that probably could have waited till 6:00 when I'm awake, or I'm at the office at 7. It's that idea that we don't have to always be available. Yeah. I think the other is thinking that, and this is such an important one. I see this happen so many times where a peer, you have like 3 peers in a department, and one of them gets promoted as the leader, and they think the other 2 have animosity toward them, or they think, oh, I don't know what my peers are going to think. Now I'm the boss. And in reality, the only person that has trouble with that problem is the new boss. They don't mind. They know you got promoted to that position. They know you're the leader. They're going to pretty much follow or listen to what you have to say. You think they're thinking that. And this is a key, is I think new leaders think their team is thinking things that they aren't thinking, because that's what they're feeling. And they're projecting that feeling onto their team. And for the most part, my sense is it has not happened that way. Yeah. So those are probably 2 things that I think are really a big deal.
Yeah, that's great. Okay. So I think a good way for us to start to land our plane here around leadership. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I would be remiss if I didn't ask you this question. Let's pull out our magic crystal ball. Let's shake it up. Let's stick it in front of you. Let's look into the future. Yeah. What do you see as the future of leadership? The next maybe 3 to 5 years, or you could go beyond that if you want to. But with the pandemic and how the world has just changed in so many ways in the last 18 months to 2 years, I'd be curious. Where do you see leadership going, Mark? What are some of the things that maybe will always be true, or maybe the things that you see needing to change?
That's a great question. That's an interesting question. I have to think about that for a second. I like the way that leadership has changed in many ways in the last year and a half, that people are starting to think differently about how they lead. I teach a lot on change leadership. Some people may call it change management. Change management to me is these things are thrown at you and you try to juggle them and manage them, and you're managing change. That happens. But wouldn't you rather be in a position to lead change? And I think we've learned that we need to be in a position to lead change, meaning that I'm going to look forward and I'm going to see that there might be 2 or 3 things coming, and I'm going to lead us into those changes that we need to make so that we're better prepared. When I've done a lot of speaking in this last year on this idea of rebounding, and there's a definitions of rebound. And you think of rebound as to bounce back, right? Well, there's actually a definition of rebound. The 4th one in Webster's dictionary says to rebound better than before. Now, that's a whole different mindset when you think of rebounding. It's not just bouncing back and everything's back to normal. It's bouncing back and being better than we were before. And that's where leadership, change leadership comes in versus change management. And I hope that people have grasped that. So I coach this hair salon, and being a bald guy, you kind of wonder, well, how does that guy coach a hair salon? Well, people are people. So, but when I was coaching them, this is the probably late last summer. So the pandemic had hit, and they closed up their business for a while, and then they started to open up again, and they realized that they had lost a lot of business on their products to places like Walmart and Amazon and places that were open. And so as I coached them to bounce back better than before, I said, how do you now prepare ahead so that if something like that ever happened again, how are you positioned in the market so that you don't get affected by that? So that's change leadership. That's projecting ahead and saying, we're going to lead differently than we did before. We're not just going to accept things the way they are. We're going to lead differently.
I love that. Yeah. Yep. Kind of that continuous learning mindset. What can we learn from this? How can we get better, smarter, faster, all that kind of stuff. I think that's great. Mark, this is fantastic. Well, I ask all my guests this question when we start to get to the end of our show. We land the plane. So what is a life hack you might have for us on how we can either have better relationships or healthier conversations, either at work or at home?
Yeah, I'll give you my wife's number one quote. I think she's given me over the years is, if you can't relate, you can't connect. And if you can't connect, you can't lead. or fill in the blank. If you can't relate, you can't connect. If you can't connect, you can't change people. If you can't relate, you can't connect, you can't fill in the blank, whatever that is as a leader. It's this idea that we've got to get to know people and how to relate to them. In fact, we've developed a communication model that we use where humility is in the center. We talked a little bit about humility already, but the first element in communication is about connecting to people. What is the connection I need to make? So even when I'm in front of an audience and I'm starting to speak, I try to get to know who the audience is before I arrive there. I'll ask the promoter of the event, hey, tell me who's there. Give me some names. I'll research some things about the organization. So as soon as I walk on stage, I have something that connects me to them. Even if I'm a military and a previous healthcare guy, I can walk into an event like I was at a crane and rigging association meeting earlier this year. I don't know anything about that stuff, but I found some elements that I could connect to them. When I connect, when I can relate, I can connect to them. When I connect, I can speak life into their organization.
Beautiful. I love that. Well, Mark, this has been great. We've covered so much ground about leadership, and I feel like I've really learned so much from you today. Hopefully everyone listening has too. I took 2 pages of notes. So before I let you go, if people want to learn more about you, follow you, hire you as a speaker, connect with you as a coach, where can they go?
Yeah, so our website is leadership10, spelled out TEN, leadership, the number 10, TEN.org. You can even email me, Mark, MARK, at leadership10.org. Our website has everything about our speaking, our leader development, our coaching practice, all of that elements on there. If you live in the panhandle of Florida and you're listening and you want to be part of our free cohort, that application is on that page as well. So anything you need to find out about me, we have a blog. You can connect with me also on LinkedIn, Mark A. Noon on LinkedIn as well.
Mark, that's great. Excellent. Well, keep up all the great work. This was amazing. Really appreciate all your insights and the gift of the work that you do in the world. So thank you for the gift that you continue to provide everybody and all the gifts that you provided us today on the show.
Excellent, Brandon. Thank you so much.
Folks, I told you would like that show. And I told you Mark was going to have a lot of things to share. As I said, I've got 2 full pages of notes. So right out of the gate, we talked about, he made this real important comment. He says, I don't know why we don't really help prepare people for these leadership roles. And I said, well, Mark, what are some of those things that leaders really need to have? And he started out of the gate and he said, look, there's 4. He said they need to be good communicators, motivation, delegation, and then culture. And then, of course, being the host that I am, I probed a little bit and said, well, what's the one that's the hardest? And he said, delegation's the hardest. People tend to just hoard stuff, feel like they've got to hold on to it. And we kind of use this analogy of a great chef in the kitchen now being the head chef or the owner and not kind of letting go of the cooking. He said, that's one of the biggest things as leaders we need to do. And then I dug a little bit more into his background and I said, how about the military and healthcare? What are best practices and what are things we can learn? And he said, in the military, one of the things that they're really good at is clear roles, clear chain of command. They don't have matrices like so many organizations do. So you know exactly who you need to go to when you got a question or issue. He said one of the areas that they're not very good at, they don't necessarily provide a lot of coaching or that one-on-one development. You're kind of sent through training, but it's kind of up to you to kind of figure it out. And then in healthcare, he said the great thing about healthcare, so people-centered. We're all about caring for people and helping people. The downside is we can do that to an extreme. We can not want to give people extra work, so we take it on ourselves. We can run around maybe rescuing a little bit too much, creates a whole bunch of burnout. And we talked about how we even see that in the church world as well. And then I asked Mark, I said, okay, well, if you got a brand new leader, what are those steps that she or he needs to take? And he started off by saying self-leadership is the first. Getting clear on your values, getting clear on your routines, consistency around those. And then step 2 is making sure that you're communicating those, kind of giving other people your user manual. And then for derailers, he said, of course, hoarding is the big one. We've got to learn to delegate. And then he mentioned a really interesting one I hadn't thought of. He said, and don't assume that your new team is thinking bad things about you, that maybe they don't trust you or believe you should be the leader. Even if you were up here and now you got promoted, don't assume that they've got ill will. They're likely okay with you being the leader and they're willing and ready to follow you. And then I said, finally, Mark, when we look into the crystal ball, what do you see leadership looking like? And he said, it's this move from managing change to leading change. How can we become more resilient, rebound better, learn better, and become more proactive in kind of moving things forward rather than just reacting to stuff happening to us? So I loved our conversation today. I took, as I said, 2 pages of notes. I hope one of those ideas really stuck with you. And my challenge to you is how can you put that in play starting today.